Welcome to the episode of Modern Bot, guys. So today I have a massive surprise. The legend himself, Hakatime, has decided to spare some time for me and join me on my channel and just kind of give us some of his great insights and just massive persona. So yeah, welcome, man. I really appreciate you joining us on this South African side, and thank you very much.
No, I appreciate it, man. I think you were the first to reach out to me and request a collab, so I'm honoring that that discussion we had very early on.
I appreciate you honoring that. I'm sure there are bigger channels you could have come to, and I appreciate at least understand. I just thought that the first time I caught your channel throughout the World Cup, I was just like, I got to get this guy on. I think you look at rugby a different way than I do. You look at rugby a different way most YouTube commentators and even TV commentators do. And I wanted to get that kind of opinion from you because I think that's what everybody's loving about your channel, and your channel is growing rapidly, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, thanks a lot, bro.
Cool, guys. So today, I want to focus on the conversation of effectively what is the future of the top 8 teams going into the next 4 years. What is now that this World Cup's over, we've had all the joy, and I have to give credit to Japan for just hosting probably one of the best World Cups that I think we've, as rugby-loving fans, have seen. Yeah. Just consistent quality throughout, amazing fan base. I mean, one of the best attendance records of over 99%. Just one of the best World Cups I think we've ever had. So I think that's just testament to how much it's growing in the Asian space. And yeah, let's look at how the next 4 years going into France. What are the top 8 teams? How do they enter these next 4 years, and how they go? So yeah, what do you feel about, just before you get into it, how do you feel about this World Cup? What is your breakdown of how you felt about it?
Oh, I think from a host perspective, I don't think there's been a better World Cup, if I'm honest with you. You know, the Japanese people, Japanese culture, they really got in behind this World Cup, and it was incredible to see. You know, I remember seeing early on, you know, you had a stadium of 19,000 people, whatever it was, watching Welsh training, singing the Welsh national anthem.
Yeah.
And I thought, how incredible. And it was pretty much for every single team. You look at it, and there were warm welcomes for every team. And Japanese people really put in some effort. And a few of my friends were lucky enough to go over, and they just said, as hosts, incredible. The Japanese people, very warm and welcoming, obviously, and really got in behind their rugby. So not only great hosts for the Rugby World Cup, but also showing that they're, you know, there's a hunger there for rugby. So that's another thing we'll touch on. But the development of the game in Asia, that's again one of the main benefits I think have come from this Rugby World Cup.
I know exactly. I think that was probably one of the most fascinating things for me. I also remember seeing when the Springboks landed a week before most teams, but how they just embraced it. And every team, you're right, every team was a case of, not only are we talking games here, we're talking the warm-up games. That game which South Africa took on Japan 2-3 weeks before the World Cup started, how the whole nation was behind it. I think just ignited the World Cup in a way that we haven't seen before, and I think we need to give a lot of credit to Japan for that, because that's the kind of thing that builds a World Cup into just not only being like a memorable, but being historic.
Yep, I agree.
Awesome, man. Okay. So let's get into the top 8 and how they will be looking into this next 4 years cycle. What is the discussion points of it? So obviously with number 8 being Japan,
yeah,
the hosts of the current World Cup, the guys who probably the most improved team in world rugby, making their first quarterfinal in this last World Cup. Jamie Joseph really just elevating this team beyond what Eddie Jones had done before him. Just they're going from leaps and bounds, getting a lot of foreign players to elevate the game. How do you feel Japan are looking for the next 4 years? What is their plan? What is their goal?
Yeah, I think they're in an interesting point in their development. So I think if you go back, you're right to point out, obviously, Eddie Jones set a fantastic base. Jamie Joseph has then been able to build on top of that base. And it looks like from a rugby public perspective in Japan, also in terms of the Japanese Rugby Union, really getting behind this team now. The next 4 years is critical for their development. There's been a lot of talk around, are they now a Tier 1 nation? Are they still a Tier 2 nation? I think to operate as a Tier 1 nation, they really need that high-level competition. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go in terms of whether they join more of the Northern Hemisphere side of things or the Southern Hemisphere side of things. There's been a lot of discussion both ways. And also, I think the decision around their coach is going to be absolutely critical. Now, we know Jamie Joseph is he's an in-demand guy, as is their assistant coach, Tony Brown. You know, so Tony Brown's actually a number of the All Blacks head coaching candidates have reached out to Tony Brown saying they want him to be part of the coaching staff. So thankfully, he's given his loyalty in behind Jamie Joseph. But I do think who they select now as their coach and who takes them forward over the next 4 years is absolutely critical to their development.
For sure. I agree with you fully. And I think that they also need to look at, like, they don't currently have, I think, the foundation to pick internally. I think they need to continue with the foundation of picking, especially New Zealand-based or Australian-based coaches. I think that is working for them. And the style of coaching that they deliver works well with their style of rugby. So I think it complements very well. And I think that's why they've had so much growth from it. And you can see it. I mean, if I was Jamie Joseph, I looked at it 4 years ago. You took on Australia, South Africa, and won. If I was him, that would be a massive task to better that. And he did. He did better that. So these next 4 years, but also look at some of the players that not only, yes, there are some quality players outside of Japan that definitely delivered. We got Lapus Labiskachny and Mashima, and also obviously the captain. You've got a lot of really quality Japanese players who aren't Japanese, but you've also got quality ones like Himeno, and there's a lot of real quality Japanese players, and that's where I think they need to focus now, is delivering those local-born legends that this kind of tournament will continue to will build in going forward. Yeah,
I agree, and that's why I say the key now is really around how do they capitalize on that momentum? Where are they going to apply themselves? If they're going to continue to play in the Pacific Cup as their predominant regular competition, I don't think that's enough. I think spending time playing with the North American teams and the Pacific Island teams, great for that level of rugby. But if they really want to take that next step, they need to be conscious around where they go next. I'd like to see them join the Southern Hemisphere competitions, but there may be some difficulty around time zones and travel, and it almost feels like the Southern Hemisphere, Rugby Championship is almost a global tournament as it is, given the distance that has to be covered. So, but it's going to be interesting how that unfolds. From a coaching perspective, I think I would say they should be pushing for Jamie Joseph in particular. I mean, he's a former All Black. He also played for Japan. He knows the Japanese culture very, very well. He's the right guy to take them forward. So let's see how that plays out. Yeah.
I fully agree with you. And I'm glad you touched on the whole Southern Hemisphere or Northern Hemisphere fight, because it seems like both are discussing and fighting that argument about Six Nations versus Rugby Championship and how that goes in. But I mean, this plays into that discussion that's been going on for a while, and that was kind of shot down by Six Nations on the whole World League tournament. That how the World League tournament, I think, could have built not only Japanese rugby, but Samoan and Fijian rugby also. Because that's the thing. I feel like the Southern Hemisphere needs almost a Southern Six Nations. It shouldn't be just the four. We should have a Six Nations with a one. You just go play one country, luck of the draw once, and go forward. And then I know maybe Fijian and Samoan rugby don't bring the money that Japanese rugby does, but I think they all bring their own thing to a tournament that would be rather exciting for us Southern Hemisphere fans to just munch and enjoy.
Yeah, no, I agree. And expanding it, beyond just Japan, it actually gives teams something to play for. There might be that discrepancy in results. So you might have the top three, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, for example, doing very, very well. But if there are other teams in there that they can compete with, then there's something to play for there. It's just not a case of turning up week in, week out and, and getting beaten comprehensively. It's, you can actually get some results there against Fiji.
But I think that these teams... No, exactly. But I mean, I think these teams like Fiji and Samoa and Japan all bring something so special to the rugby championship and rugby in general that we cannot ignore. It's not about always winning. Sometimes it's about kind of like the team you enjoy watching. Japan brings one hell of a flair of rugby and calculated game that I think few countries can strive towards. Fiji, on the other hand, with players like Semi-Radradra, which I have to admit, I will just put on a game to see him play. Like, that is he is a that guy is my favorite way to explain him is like if a semi-truck had a rugby ball in its hand kind of thing. That guy is amazing to watch. I mean, it's not only him. The whole team is made of players like that. So I completely love it because I think it also challenges our teams in different ways and also gives, because that's the other problem. You're playing, if South Africa or let's say New Zealand, you're playing some of the best nations in the world every week. You don't have time to blood players and give them some opportunity to really challenge themselves. And I think giving them opportunity to not only like giving like Japan opportunity to play some of the best teams in the world, but giving our teams players to challenge and experiment, I think develops Southern Hemisphere rugby more than I think we completely understand. I think that's something that like England and then have have the ability to do against teams like Scotland or Italy, where they can just experiment a little bit more on their formula throughout the tournament.
Yep. And I think also giving them that exposure, as you say, it helps build their own awareness from different markets with those players. It's all good news. So I'm hoping Southern. If we're looking towards a global tournament, and if Six Nations are looking to shoot that down, then I'm hoping the Southern Hemisphere takes a lead on that.
Yeah, I mean, just starts the conversation at least. Starts the conversation. So moving on to number 7, France.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting team for me. The French did, I think, outstandingly well in this tournament. Unfortunately, things didn't maybe go all the way their way. But let's face it, this is a team that's consistently performed in the top 2 to 4, if not winning the under-20s tournament. They have some of the best youth players in the world, in my opinion. And yes, maybe not all the luck, and consistency. But they have probably one of the best foundation systems in the world right now. And they are definitely just forced to grow. They have to. There's no way there's going to go anywhere. They have to grow. Yeah.
No, they will be. My pick is they will be contenders for the next World Cup. A great young player, Paul Romain Ntamak, for me was one of the top players in their team. Obviously, breakthrough player of the year as well. The development systems, the resources they have at their disposal, both commercially, but also it's becoming a destination of choice for a lot of players around the world. So they're getting an influx of Pacific Island players. They're getting an influx of South African players from all over the world. They're able to attract players now. And given the resources, given the fact the World Cup is coming their way, given the fact that, the players that are available at the disposal, as you say, they will grow for sure. And just on their performance at the Rugby World Cup, I mean, their passion and flair is their greatest strength. It's also their greatest weakness, right? So you saw the incident, obviously, the brain explosion, the elbow in the final. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't expect that from anyone else, unfortunately. It's just it's that is their greatest strength, and it unfortunately can be their undoing as well. So they really need someone who can guide them correctly. And it seems like it's not a Rugby World Cup unless there is a French player revolt against the coach, which we saw again in this one. So if they can channel that passion, if they can channel it, they will be a force to be reckoned with for sure. And as I say, great young players coming through. I actually think the biggest impact on that game against Wales was the loss of Romain Ntamak at halftime, rather than the elbow. I mean, with him there, I believe they could have got home in the end. They started playing quite defensively that second half, rather than playing attacking. And he was one person in particular that was managing the game very, very well, I thought. So
no, I have to admit, Ntamak, watching his games, I cannot believe such a cool head and such a calculated head sits on top of such a young body. I mean, the guy is not only in kicking, it's open play that he demands an exceptionally strong French backline and also how to position that. So I think overall, he is probably key to the growth of French rugby going forward, and I'd love to see him go forward. And he completely deserves. When I saw the announcements of the breakthrough player, Ntamak was just like, he's head and shoulders above the rest, in my opinion. The way that you can control the team going into it, especially such a passionate team. And I think he was the reason the French. I would have loved to see that England-France game in the group stages. I think the French can do a game like that and really change a World Cup.
Yeah, they're just so disruptive. I mean, I've got really bad memories of French teams at Rugby World Cups. If I look back at some of the results, but that's exactly what they can do. They can just flip the form guide on its head. They can completely disrupt what all of the pundits think is going to happen, and you can never really count them out. So if they can channel that passion and flair, they will be a force in the next Rugby World Cup. I did see the announcement on the coaching staff. There's the Welsh defensive coach who's going there now into the French setup, so that's a great outcome for them. I think if they can shore up some of those defensive frailties, they're going to be very, very difficult. So, and I saw Clive Woodward. He came out and said, he expects France to be one of the favourites for the next Rugby World Cup, and that acquisition of the Welsh defensive coach is part of the reason. He just thinks, he's got very, very high raps there on that coach. So let's see if they can control, if they can focus, if they can get the right level of support, they will be contenders for sure.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, just to finish off, I mean, the home ground advantage is something you can never discount. And I think this is the World Cup for them to really just kind of like finally become. They are the only team in World Cup history to reach a final twice and never make it, never win it. They're the only. They have consistently performed probably above what a lot of teams think they could. So I do think that if they can continue on this growth, they have the player pool to do it and are a force to be reckoned with. That number 7 ranking for me is a very low indication of what I think they will be going into, not only just for now, going into this World Cup, the next World Cup. I think they would be in the top 4 for sure. Yeah. I think they have the player to do it.
Yeah,
cool. Let's move on to Aussies.
Yeah, sure.
So Australia is unfortunately, obviously, Micah Checker drama. They've set up a whole new coaching pool and a whole structure to figure out what's the future of the Aussie rugby. And there's been drama, different splits of leagues, different situations. How does Australian rugby kind of like stabilize itself, recalibrate, get back to the kind of style that makes them great? Because to be fair, this wasn't a terrible World Cup. Yes, I know they didn't get as far as they could have, but there were moments of brilliance. To be fair, some of the best players in the world hail from Australia. And it just didn't seem that in this World Cup it was a gel that was a problem. What do you feel from this World Cup 1 point wrong?
Yeah, I think losing in a quarterfinal, I mean, there's no disrespect in that. There's no shame in that. I mean, I think that's probably the right level that they're at right now if we all take an objective view. And losing to England in particular. So I think as a campaign, it's probably about right given where they're at. Michael Checker. Now, I did a video on Michael Checker and Australian rugby, and it's in a complete disarray. I mean, they have a number of challenges they're dealing with. So there is, for a relatively small player pool, there is a significant competition for other codes. So, I mean, the biggest sport in Australia is Australian rules, Australian football, which I don't think anyone else in the world plays. But that's one of the big competition for skilled athletes. But they still have some really, really good players, as you say. I've not been impressed with their board. I've not been impressed with their CEO. I've not been impressed with their administrative setup in general. I think Checker is a very emotional guy, loses his cool. He built the siege mentality around the players, which was essentially it's us against the world. And I think that was just a response to how he's been treated by the board, how he's been treated by the administrators, and also some of the questions he cops from the media as well. So and it just drove the wrong behaviour I saw there. So who they appoint next, they've got 3 or 4 Kiwi guys in their Kiwi coaches in mind. I think Dave Rennie is probably top of their list at the moment. He would be a very, very good choice. But I really believe they have a good opportunity there. As you say, they still have a great pool of athletes and some of the best rugby players in the world. So if the administrators can do their job, get a cohesive approach there, in the back office, and then start attracting players that can do well, they can be very, very competitive. But they've just got a lot of problems to sort out, and it feels like any coach who's stumbling into that environment is set up for failure right off the bat. That's my concern.
Exactly, and I mean something that as a South African fan I share. It's not only unfortunately when the back office isn't working towards the goal, it becomes a problem for the whole union and the whole organization. And I think that we had a similar problem, and we have similar problems like that regularly. Unfortunately, when these people really often like to tend to blame the coach, and I'm not saying, I have to admit I have some faults for Checker, I have to admit, but I don't think it's completely his fault. That's where I'm going to draw the line. I think that there's maybe some things that he didn't help with, but unfortunately, there was many things that held him back, and he could have handled better. But at the same time, it wasn't his fault. Overall, I think probably where I feel Australian rugby needs to start is just kind of like building back the confidence and the supporter base in Super Rugby, kind of the way that they play, the way that they can challenge, because they are still one of the, for a long time, especially early 2010s, they were one of the most, were very competitive in Super Rugby and can still be, in my opinion, but haven't really been able to find that consistency in their gameplay, which I think is plaguing them in tournaments like this, where you need to win consistently. They have great moments where they can pull off one of the greatest victories. Look at this year, taking on the All Blacks and demolishing them. One of the biggest victories against All Blacks ever. Yet the next week, they couldn't put that same performance together. And that's kind of a metaphor for Australian rugby right now.
Yep, that's right. It's either rocks or diamonds, you know. The only other thing I would say, there's a couple of big checkpoints that are coming up in the next 6 months. So they're doing a full review of the World Cup campaign from an independent group, some ex-players. So I'd be very interested in what comes out of that. And then obviously the appointment of the new coach, which they want to make that decision before the end of this year. So I think those are a couple of critical points we'll see over the next few months. And yeah, as I say, I'd really like to see a strong Australian rugby again. You know, I remember the days of, you know, the heated battles between New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa. I'd really like to get back to that point. Even if it's just, you know, my Southern Hemisphere bias there as well. I really want to see a strong Australian, team.
Exactly. I mean, I'm a massive fan of the way that Australia played for many years. I remember even growing up, like the way that Australia plays it's almost like I've always felt, and I mean, some people might disagree with me. I've always felt that Australia kind of plays a mix between New Zealand and South African rugby. They can often have a very strong forward pack with a dominant loose trio, but then when they get the gas going and they've got a little bit of forward movement, they can move the ball in ways that somebody would only dream. So that's the kind of rugby I want to see from them, and I think they can do it. They have the athletes. You're right. It's not about the athletes for them. It's about the culture and the back office that needs to be fixed. And these are going to be the most important 3 months of Australian rugby for a while. How this changes, and and I think it will reflect in Super Rugby next year, because it's becoming more and more important, especially in the Southern Hemisphere. It's not only anymore about building the national team, but building that the clubs follow the national picture. And New Zealand, I think, pioneered that. South Africa, I think, has started to follow it slowly. To be very fair, slowly. But I think it's something that Australian rugby still maybe needs to buy into and get a unified picture.
Yep. I'll just say one more thing on Australia. So they implemented a setup with the director of rugby, and to my mind, that proved to be an issue. I think Michael Checker was forced into a number of decisions, even during the World Cup campaign, that he, as the head coach, completely disagreed with and was overruled by the director of rugby. So as a structure, I'm just not a fan of that kind of approach. It'll be interesting to see with Rassie, obviously, as he's moving to more of a director of rugby role, how that plays out. But there's some real inefficiencies I see with that structure, and it's played its way out in the Australian example. I know there's been some massive falling outs between the CEO and the coach. Even during the Rugby World Cup, there's been reports of falling out. And you know, if the head coach doesn't have full autonomy over the national team, to me, that's a problem. The head coach should be the man. The head coach should be able to make full disclosure on decisions that need to be made in the best interest of the team. If they have to go through another hurdle in order to get those decisions across the line, in my mind, you're undermining what the head coach is trying to achieve.
Exactly. The thing is, you're taking away the reason you hired him, the autonomy of a player, of a person in that position, and the fact of the matter is that they're only in that position because they're one of the best in the business, and you almost take away the actual calculated passion that kind of position requires to achieve.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so Australia sounds good. Let's move on to the Irish. Number 5. So the Irish had, in my opinion, yes, some people might argue about the World Cup. There was some moments that weren't great, but overall, I know that they lost to Japan. They lost at a bit of a beating to probably one of the best New Zealand games that happened in 2019. But still, many great things. Probably the best forward packs you can find in world rugby right now, and something I think they're going to do. Joe Smith has done, I think, great things for Irish rugby. They don't have a giant pool of players that they can pick from. It's not small. They have a healthy local league. But where do you think that? Yes, things in my opinion didn't go perfectly right for them. But was it the predictability of the Irish format that needs to now change, or is it that it was just maybe not that the structure they had was not as solid as they thought it was?
Yeah, I think predictability is probably the right word. If I'm honest with you, I think Joe Smith did outstanding work there for the Irish team, and he found a style of play that really worked, and he found a player pool that he could put there as his core that he could build on and implement that strategy. Yeah. The issue is it happened a little bit too early, probably 2 years too early, I would say. And it gave teams an opportunity to really target their style and look for ways to beat them. It actually forced the All Blacks to evolve somewhat. You know, that rush defense, which broke down the All Blacks twice in the World Cup cycle. They were able to get wins over the All Blacks. It forced all teams to adjust. And unfortunately, you know, you had some players that were getting to the end of their careers. Joe Smith did exactly what you would expect a head coach to do, and that is support his players that have done the job for him in the past, back them to try to do the same again. But unfortunately, it was just a year or two, too late, is how I see the performance around the Rugby World Cup. But I mean, there's still a great team with a great player pool, and I know Andy Farrell's been appointed now as their head coach. I don't know if that's more of an interim step, or if that's something they're backing him to take them forward into the next World Cup cycle. I'd like to see them be a bit more bold around their coaching selection, rather than keep with the established, a guy who's been in the mix already. But I will say, of all of the teams that we're covering off today, the reaction from the Irish media and from the Irish fans has been very poor. It's been extremely poor. They're just beating up this Irish team and just, looking for people to blame.
But not only, I mean, I feel like they're the first team to beat up almost every team. Like, I have to admit, if there's two media pools that I despise, and I mean, I'm not trying to be like heavily against them, but the Irish and the English media pools are probably the worst media pools you can find in the world. Like, they will either blame the opposition for something, or they will find some scandal and blow it massively out of proportion. And I mean, also attack the Irish team. I think a very commendable tournament. I mean, no team can argue going against the All Blacks at that day was the best game they've played this year. I do not think that is a true reflection. And also the passion of that Japanese team when they lost that wasn't a bad Irish day. That was an immaculate Japanese performance. Yeah. No, they came up against a team that was just riding a wave of emotion. Obviously, it's a home World Cup. They've got everything on the line, and you saw that from the Japanese team, a lot of passion. But yeah, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see, the Irish public and the Irish media get them behind their team, because I still think they've got world-class players here, and they've got a rebuilding process they need to go through. But they certainly have the player pool there. And I think once exactly.
Yeah, I was going to quickly say I'm a big fan of Ronan O'Gara. He obviously came and a really successful coaching stint as an assistant coach in the Crusaders setup. He's now head coach of La Rochelle in France there. So it'll be interesting to see how his development goes. But I would expect that come World Cup time, he'll be in amongst that coaching staff.
Exactly. I think that he definitely needs to be. He understands the kind of Irish style. I just have one argument against him. That was his approach of saying that Eddie Jones should have fixed the scrum for the final. I do not think that was a very fair comment, and not something to state in my opinion publicly. I mean, it's literally just saying this is public cheating. Fine. That was a little bit of a dumb move from him, but overall, I agree with you. He's got a very, very clever, calculated brain behind him. And to be fair, that kind of move publicly just shows the kind of mind he does have on him. So he does understand that whatever it takes to win. The one thing I think that for Irish rugby that is important is I think they need to continue building the style they had. The rush defense was calculated in quality. I think they need to improve it and maybe just look at a plan B. I think that was their biggest problem, that once plan A didn't work, there was no plan B. And that's where they need to focus most of their efforts now. Yeah,
I think a few teams are guilty of not having a plan B, but certainly in the case of Ireland. And you're right. If you believe that, that comment on the scrums, if you believe that that's what you should, you don't say that in the public eye. It showed a bit of an experience. and I actually thought, when I heard him say that, I thought, if they did that against the Springboks, England did that against the Springboks, that would be the second time it was done against the Springboks in that Rugby World Cup. Exactly. I believe this might be a little bit controversial, but I think the Italian game, there was a little bit of gamesmanship in that one as well. I can probably say
that. I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. It's controversial, but I also had a little bit of a question mark, especially when watching. I was like, this looks calculated, and to be fair, it didn't work out for the Italians there anyway. So it's a little bit of a dumb move to say that publicly. It didn't work out last time. I don't think it would have worked out because it wasn't. Yes, it did give South Africa a lot of points, but it wasn't the only place South Africa was getting a bit of traction and. It's one of those things. But to be fair, we will get to other conversations on player selections and substitutions for the World Cup as we go through this. So let's get into those as they arrive.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you'd like to cover on this Irish team before we move on?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, perfect. So next up, the Welsh. I think probably sitting in the top four, proud, and I know that Gatland has obviously moved on now to looking at Super Rugby, and probably one of the most prestigious coaching tenures of any coach in the world. Maybe Hansen taking him out. He is a pinnacle of rugby coach and has really brought that Welsh team far and beyond what they could actually, in my opinion, achieve with many other coaches. They have a rather small playing pool, a very mixed style that doesn't seem to have really worked well together always, and obviously the shallow pool not helping, but yet have outgunned and outperformed many people would calculate. I think that this World Cup has showcased the kind of quality Wales can bring, and unfortunately, yes, maybe not achieved what they would have liked, but that game against South Africa in the semi-final, I think, is a testament to, as you said, defensive coaching from them, just far and above beyond many teams, and the way that they play just until the last minute. They know how to close out games. That French game was tight. Yes, there were many things France could have done to take it, but the fact of the matter is the team that finishes top in the 80 minutes is the team that's the tops, and they are that kind of style team.
Yep.
I mean, Grand Slam this year,
grinding out wins. They seem to find a way to win. It just seemed come the World Cup time, they were a little bit tired. I thought that the team started to look a bit tired and their performances were below what we've seen from them in the past. They had a fantastic 2019. Really strong performances in the Six Nations. But then unfortunately coming into the World Cup, they just seemed to drop off a little bit. But, made a semi-final of Rugby World Cup and were extremely competitive there. 3-point difference. Andre Pollard kick was the difference in the end. So they did extremely well. When you think of Welsh rugby, you think of Warren Gatland, as well. They sort of go hand in hand. So how they move forward now is going to be very, very interesting. I haven't seen any announcements around who the replacement coach is, and that may have come out already, but it's such a big decision. I think for both the two teams here that have got the biggest decisions around coaches, I believe it's Wales and it's the All Blacks. There's some significant impact there based on who they choose, and I'll be interested how this plays out. But I'm a big fan. They've got an incredible player pool. They know their style. They've proven that they had the measure of England, actually, in 2019 and 2018, actually. So they've got a style that can really disrupt teams. They slow the ball down, They play defensively, and they knock teams. One of their great strengths is they draw teams into their tempo of play. You see teams.
No, exactly. Exactly. I think the Welsh showcase World Cup. Probably my favorite game from this World Cup is the actually the game against Australia.
Yep.
That was very, very interesting because it was a different style. I mean, that opening drop goal, showcasing and putting teams off, and really just showing how they held off an impressive Australian attack in the second half is why I think that this Welsh team nobody can mess with them. They had an amazing World Cup, and that was probably, in my opinion, the peak of their World Cup, and it was a little bit hard to reach that again. And my reasoning for it always is that, unfortunately, I just don't have the player pool to be able to really confidently pick that second string team. They often have to put those 80-minute games in a World Cup, and 7-minute games later, that can be really tough to continue to deliver. And that's probably their biggest issue. So I think I also haven't seen any real discussions on who's replacing Gatland. I'd love to see who that is, because obviously those discussions need to start happening quite soon. But I think whoever that is, the biggest thing that they need to look at is to start looking at building those structures in to be able to have those key positions, have a second option or a third option, because it's really probably their biggest problem, that they just cannot have those foundational changes, and especially in your key positions. Yeah,
now they certainly had a significant number of injuries going into the World Cup and also during the World Cup. So it tested their depth. And to win a Rugby World Cup, it's a 31-man game, even more than that, 35, 36-man game. You need those players waiting back at home to come in if need be. And I think you're right. I think from a player pool perspective, from a skill sets perspective, they probably didn't have the resources at their disposal to cover some of those gaps. So that's got to be a key focus for their development, is if you want to win a World Cup, you need more than a 31-man squad, more than a 32-man squad. You need players that can come in. You need a level of depth that can manage, the difficulty, because it's hard to win a Rugby World Cup. You've got to fill those gaps in key positions. Otherwise, you can be found out, unfortunately.
Exactly, and it's those player management is such an essential part of that. And unfortunately, I feel that was probably their biggest downside. And I mean, it didn't help that they probably had a 2019 that I don't even think they completely expected, because they were dominant as a Northern Hemisphere force in this 2019. And unfortunately, I think, again, just like you said with Ireland, that maybe fractionally peaking too soon. Looking at maybe just a game, 2 or 3 games later, and I think they could have maybe been a contender in the final. Unfortunately, it just was a little too soon for them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if Ireland peaked 2 years too early, I think Wales peaked probably 4 months too early. 3 or 4 months too early. Incredible 2019, just towards the end. The players started to look a bit tired. They were really having to test their, the players that were at their disposal, and unfortunately, one step, they weren't far off. To lose a semi-final against the eventual champions by 3 points, they were very, very close. And if they had have gotten over the top of South Africa, they were one team who proved that they had the measure of England. So, could they have won a World Cup final? Was the difference in them winning a World Cup, the Handré Pollard 3 points? Possibly.
But that shows you the fine lines of a World Cup like this. I mean, that's where I think that's the amazing thing about it. That it's you're talking split moments of decisions, tiny moments of maybe that Francois Lowe steal that happened for us to get that penalty not happening. That's the World Cup lifting versus not lifting, and it's scary to think that 4 years can get down to a moment of a ball steal. I think that's what we all need to understand about this game, that it isn't always just, it's not, no matter how much you plan, many things happen. And I mean, that's why as South African fan winning this World Cup, I don't think we can take any kind of like solace of, it takes so many years to build that, and you've got to understand. And that's why I have to respect the New Zealand situation as much as I do, because yes, you won a World Cup, but you now need to keep that going, because not a few teams can, like we spoke about Ireland and Wales peaking too soon. but somehow New Zealand have peaked for 10 years. That is just incredible. So that is something that we do need to pay homage to, and hopefully teams can understand that and understand how much that effort that takes to stay at the top level for so long.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's move on to World Cup second place, England. So probably a team that Eddie Jones, when he took over this team, effectively stated he needs 5 World Cup winners to take this World Cup. He needs 5 world-class players to be. This is the thing, and he obviously took some outstanding players, Vunipola brothers. You have your Tuolangi, your Owen Farrell. But interestingly enough, and I think this is where a lot of people question is that going into the last game, he questioned himself and went with a Ford Farrell selection. But now going forward, he has decided to stay with English rugby and has admitted that he made a mistake with the selection. What does he do going forward? Does he build these world-class players? This is a relatively young English side. Most of these players will be playing in 2023. I think that there's a lot of promise for this team to challenge this World Cup quite comfortably.
I agree. They have players. They have a young team. They're going to be very, very dangerous this next World Cup cycle. They've got the right guy at the top with Eddie Jones. He's been in the structure already. He's built a solid base. And they've proven, more importantly, that they can beat everyone. So they're not going to fear any team. Right? So I believe they are ideally placed for a run in 2023. A lot can happen. But you're right. The old adage is to win a World Cup, you need 5 players that are the best in their position. You need 5 players that are world class. You need 5 players that are X factor or very, very good. So, and he's got that at his disposal. Great young players. I saw the interview where he admitted he probably got it wrong, and it was more from a player management perspective. He just said after all of the effort they put into that All Blacks game, it was interesting to see that because the All Blacks, obviously they beat Ireland quite significantly. England then comes back the next week and does what the All Blacks did to Ireland to the All Blacks. Then South Africa does what England did to the All Blacks to England. So there's a lot to be said for, and this is high-level sport with very, very small margins. So there's a lot to be said with the type of effort that it takes to really put on performances like we saw from all of these teams. And South Africa peaked perfectly at exactly the right time. England, 1 week too early. I mean, if Ireland were 2 years too early, Wales were 3 or 4 months too early, England were literally 7 days too early,
Yeah, it's...
And what he highlighted, there's such small margins. What he highlighted is that, by rotating the players, he could have had a bit more freshness in the squad, and possibly could have, had a bit more there when facing, a Rugby World Cup final. So the old adage is you've got to lose one to win one. I just think all signs point to England being very, very strong in the next World Cup cycle.
Fully agree with you. I think they're going to be quite the force to be reckoned with. And I think that overall England are exciting. They have a massive amount of range in their way that they can play. And probably one of the teams where I think they do have a plan B and C and D. They were very, very fluid in this World Cup. And that was probably the most exciting thing about them going forward. They was very calculated in the way they played. And from some of the best locks you can get in the world rugby to backline players, which will cut any defense apart. It was really good to see. Probably, in my opinion, the mistake that they made in this World Cup, and something that you also alluded to in your video on this World Cup final, was they avoided the lineouts like it was dangerous, like it was effectively scoring a try. And that really cut off forward. And that's where I felt Eddie Jones did agree that, he made the mistake of, if he was going to play forward, he needed Ford to kick the way that he kicks normally, and just didn't do that. So I do wonder if he's going to try and effectively build in the next 4 years that Ford-Farrell partnership and trust it again, or and just something similar to obviously how New Zealand has pioneered the Richie Mwanga-Barrett partnership, but obviously within our centre fly. Is he going to be developing that going forward, or do you feel he's going to go back to trusting Farrell at that 10 position?
Oh, interesting. That's going to be very interesting. I think he's got, with those two guys in particular, and as you say, with the view that they do have more of a plan B in mind, he's got an opportunity to do both, depending on the opposition. I mean, his words were, It's 23-man game now, so you look at the right positional play for the games. I think that he's got a number of different game styles at his disposal, and that's another thing, is if he can work through and make both of those options very, very strong. Again, they've got more options at their disposal, and they can be dangerous against many, many teams. I just think on the lineouts, from a psychological perspective, if you're implementing game plans that are negating one of the strengths of the opposition, to me, you're almost admitting defeat in certain areas. And I'm not a fan of that kind of psychology going into a Rugby World Cup final. I called it a tactical error. I still believe that. I think that he probably overthought the lineouts. Yes, the Springboks have a dominant lineout, but if you start going to you can't avoid a lineout in a game of rugby. So rather than attempting to avoid it, compete. And you're also saying to one of your top players, Amaro Itoje, you're saying, "Oh, I don't believe you're good enough."
Exactly.
To challenge the Springboks. It's the wrong psychology, and it's the wrong mentality going into a Rugby World Cup final. You've got to enable these young guys to say, "This is a final. This is your opportunity to win a game, to win a world championship. Go out there and compete."
Exactly. 80 minutes to prove you're the best. And I mean, especially, and that's why I think it's hard. Like you've got 80 minutes to prove you're the best, especially after a performance that the Toje was flying high in that All Blacks game. He definitely probably was the best lock in the world in that semi-final, and could have, I think, challenged any Springbok lock in that final. But I don't think he was given the opportunity. Like he really wasn't able to really stamp himself in that game. And that gave South Africa a lot of opportunity there. So that's why I felt like also when Gara was talking about the scrums, South Africa really, that wasn't their weakest point. That wasn't their strongest point in this. That they had the ability to really dominate in the line outside, which gave them a lot of traction, and something that I think Eddie Jones will probably dream about for the next 4 years, but will make the team and him probably that much better for it, and so much scarier, because I think he'll learn from this. He's the kind of coach that he does not just lose and move forward. He learns from his mistakes, and he is no joke to face. The guy is scary, and I know that he finally moved to he's staying in English rugby, but I really would have hoped. I actually hoped he would have moved back to Australian rugby. It would have been really nice to see what he could do with that. I think he can build that into a force. Yep,
I agree.
Awesome. So let's move on to the last two. Sorry, we've been going for a while now. Let's move on to the last two. New Zealand rugby. Obviously, the tenure of Henson's done. Henson, probably the most successful coach of all time, in my opinion. The guy trying to topple a already outstanding performance from All Blacks and somehow still build on that is something that many people would love to achieve. Yes, maybe not the World Cup they would have loved, but finishing it off strong with a confident win in the third place playoffs. They have got a couple of players retiring after this World Cup now, which is something they have to look at. But overall, a consistent foundation in the All Blacks coaching always gives All Blacks fans a bit of a confidence and a silent understanding that there are many things to look forward to. But I think probably, where do you think New Zealand rugby needs to look at these next 4 years, and where do you think that they are comfortable in the next 4 years?
Yeah, so first thing, obviously the coaching decision is going to be a big one, and that discussion is really heating up in New Zealand. There's a number of really, really strong contenders. I think Dave Rennie was one of the top 4 contenders, but he's since withdrawn his application. So it's going to come down to Scott Robertson, who has an incredible record. He doesn't have international rugby experience, but at super level, at domestic level, absolutely incredible. And then you've got 2 other guys. Now, Jamie Joseph hasn't officially put his name in the ring, but he is touted as either a current or a future All Blacks coach. Let's see. I'd prefer he stays with Japan, though. I think for their development, that's the right guy at the right time. So then you look at 2 guys. Ian Foster, obviously part of the existing coaching setup. Now, the way the All Blacks work, culture and values is above everything, right? Pride in the jersey. And that's why they were able to get up for that 3rd and 4th place playoff, because you're still playing an All Blacks test match in the All Blacks jersey. We treat that very, very seriously.
It does.
So based on that, I believe they will appoint Ian Foster. I know that's not going to be a popular decision for most people, But I also think, given that lack of international experience for Scott Robertson, it gives him an opportunity to come into the coaching setup as an assistant, apply himself there, and the All Blacks will benefit there because they get the new, fresh ideas from Scott Robertson, as well as having that existing core values in the jersey. So that's the direction I think they will take. That announcement will be before Christmas, so that's fine. But their biggest challenge is going to be at number 8, I believe. I believe 6 and 8 are going to be real challenges for this All Blacks team. No one really jumps out as the likely player who will fill that gap of Kieran Reid. They've had a number of different options, but I really think that is going to be one of their major challenges in the loose. Most other positions they have coverage for, and they'll need to develop some young players. But I believe number 8 is going to be very, very difficult to fill.
Fully agree with you there. You've summed it up so beautifully. I agree with you that's most likely where we go. I've assumed Ian Foster also almost likely is going to go into that position, just because that is essential. And you're right. You can have Robertson come in as an assistant to just build up, and then give him that experience to maybe take on the World Cup after that. That is definitely the direction that they're going. One thing that I find interesting after your number 8 position is, does New Zealand Rugby continue with the Richuanga partnership of 10 and 15, or do they go back to the Barrett Mackenzie partnership that was fostering and probably one of the most deadly things I've seen in World Rugby before that? And I have to admit, I'm going to say this with all the sadness in my heart. If that went to the World Cup, I don't think the result would have been the same. I think New Zealand would have walked away with it 10-love. That was a scary partnership. Although, to be fair, saying that, and that's where I have to now question myself, is Richie Mo'unga going into later stage of the tournament and some of the games, he is a genius tactically and a very, very calculated player. But unfortunately, do you take that up over Barrett in that position? How do you feel about this? Where do you feel?
So you're right. If Mackenzie was fit, he would have been the first choice. The Barrett-Mackenzie combination would have been the first choice. My issue with Richie Mo'unga, at 10, if you look at Beauden Barrett at 10, if you look at any of the high-level fly halves, they all seem to have a lot of time and a lot of space to make key decisions. So you look at Barrett when he's at first 5. He just seems to be able to glide across the field and have time and space available to him. Dan Carter was the same. They all have this air of confidence around space and the ability to manage space. Richie Mo'unga doesn't have that skill set. And that was one of my concerns after the game against the Springboks, is he is a guy that can be put under pressure. He is a guy, obviously, relatively young in his development and his career. So I immediately thought teams are going to target Richie Mo'unga. So for me, first choice is Barrett at 10. I just prefer him I prefer the 10 to be someone who has an air of confidence around them, who can manage a team, and who just has that extra time and space. And Barrett's one of those guys. Then, obviously, if we look back 18 months, that combination of Mackenzie and Barrett was extremely dangerous. You get all of the benefits of the Mo'unga-Barrett combo, but with just that additional time and space at 10. So I think they'll go back to that. I really do. And I think Richie has an opportunity now to work on his game a little bit. He'll come back stronger for it, for sure. But yeah, you touch on a great point. To me, that is the preferred partnership for me in the All Black squad.
I'm glad that somebody else agrees with me. I think that definitely is going to be. But I mean, there's a lot of things to be looking forward to as an All Black fan going forward. I mean, players like ALB, and that just really just exciting. The guy does open up space a lot all over the field. There's still many consistent and strong players going forward into this. So I think that the All Black Rugby is as it always is, in a very safe space and still very scary. I mean, in South African media here, we are very much talking about 2020 effectively being, can South Africa bring back the dominance and try and now cement that against the All Blacks? And I mean, that's still a massively daunting task. Some would say the similar to facing off at the World Cup. Because unfortunately, the question mark still cases that we could not beat the All Blacks in this World Cup.
Yeah. No, it's very, very nice for Rassie, obviously, to use his acceptance speech at the Rugby World Awards, to highlight the great work by Hansen and the All Blacks. But what he's really done there is he's given South Africa a real challenge. He's basically said, one World Cup does not make a trend. We've got something to look forward to here. If we can actually build, into a more consistent team, then that's a challenge that South Africans, should be excited about. We've got a challenge on our hands to try and be more of a successful team. And I looked at those comments, both sides. It's a great, very humbling comments from him. Really, really nice to say. But also, it's the right approach for South Africans to be taking. You've got a level of success now. To build on that, the next challenge is to become consistent, because for a lot of teams, once you hit the highs, there's only one way down, one way from there, and it's normally down. You need to encourage the team to continue to look forward with challenges in order to continue to develop.
No, exactly. So the final thing I want to cover on the Springboks before we move to the South Africa is, obviously, a trend of many Southern Hemisphere teams is this the northern migration. A lot of players moving over. How do you feel that's going to affect the next 4 years? Do you feel that there's enough players to build that it won't really affect, or is it starting to go to chip away at the All Blacks dominance?
It is. In a short answer, I do feel that Southern Hemisphere rugby really needs to do something in the next World Cup cycle. I think the momentum that has been built around European rugby in general, both France and in the UK and in Ireland, is significant. And I just think that the commercial benefits, the ability to influence world rugby, it's all coming out of Europe at the moment. And the danger is, if Southern Hemisphere does not do something and do something quickly, they're at danger of losing dominance. You could have looked at it, if England had have got up and won the World Cup, then you could look at it as a major shift between North and South. Thankfully, again, my Southern Hemisphere bias, I'm glad the Springboks got up there. But yeah, it's certainly a major risk. And I would like to, we touched on it earlier, but I'd like to see them do more around, firstly, pulling the Japanese market in, because from a commercial perspective, that is a real opportunity for Southern Hemisphere rugby. How they capitalize that and grow that from both a world game perspective, we touched on Fiji and others, but also a commercial perspective. It's one of the few opportunities we have as Southern Hemisphere rugby to maintain competitiveness against what is a growing, dominant European, league.
Exactly. No, exactly. You couldn't. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Unfortunately, the tide is turning. Yes, Southern Hemisphere is holding on, but at some point, the dam walls have to break, and we need to evolve. And unfortunately, that's what frustrates me. My Southern Hemisphere bias may be coming out also here. What frustrates me about cancelling things like the World League is that I think that is maybe Northern Hemisphere rugby trying to hold on to their dominance and their massive cash cow that is the Six Nations, because it's mean money. We're talking multiple times what we've got, and that's frustrating. But that is something that hopefully Southern Hemisphere rugby and SANZAR or whatever can figure out. But at this point, I am sad to say that I don't know if there is really an answer yet. There's nothing. It doesn't seem like enough movement is being made to solve those problems.
Yeah, I agree. And this next year is going to be very, very interesting on who is able to capitalize on that Japanese market. I'd like to see us move to SANZAR, with the inclusion of Japan and Fiji, let's say. But whatever it is, I mean, it's time for Southern Hemisphere rugby to be bold, because, in terms of development, in terms of commercial resources, in terms of its ability to attract players from all over the world, the Northern Hemisphere is becoming the destination of choice. And if something is not done, Southern Hemisphere teams will for sure fall behind.
Exactly. Awesome. So before we get too long, let's finish off with the Springboks at world number 1 right now. For now, the World Cup winning team, a team that 18 months ago was probably in the lowest points in World Cup, like in historic history, at least in the last 20 years. They just didn't look right. They had just been clobbered by New Zealand. Ireland took them to the cleaners. I've seen comments of people saying South Africa couldn't win a raffle at that time. Going on to win the World Cup is a mean story, but not only that, I think it's a massive story for South Africa. As a South African, seeing the first black captain for South Africa lift the trophy, just the whole country partying together from all walks of life. It is probably one of the proudest moments I've experienced in my life, and I just want to say thank you to rugby that South Africa could experience that. I think that is why we play this sport, because it brings everybody together, not only different colors, but different sizes, different shapes, and different backgrounds. The sport is a unification that we cannot underestimate, and I appreciate that, and I think that is quite powerful. But it is going to be a very interesting 4 years going forward for South Africa. This is the 4 years that I actually thought was our World Cup 4 years. Rassie Erasmus originally took over this team with 2023 in mind, looking at this as a 6-year plan. But now, obviously, he's now taken the World Cup now in what I thought was early when I originally looked at this World Cup, but he has done it. Do these next 4 years look promising? Obviously, my biggest question will be that there are some key players which are retiring, similar to the All Blacks, but there are some promising players coming up, and he's obviously moving out of that coaching position into a director of rugby competition. How do you feel that's going to go? And obviously, there's some talks about the new Springbok coach. Do you feel that these next 4 years are growth or stagnation points?
So let me just say, firstly, I'm really, really happy for you, man. I felt the passion from all South African supporters, and I couldn't be happy for you and for all supporters. As you say, rugby is a great game. It unites people. It unites players from all different sizes and shapes, players from all different walks of life. Just an incredible result. So I'm really, really happy for you and for South African rugby fans. In terms of what's next, so what I love about Rassie in particular is he understands the rugby DNA of South Africa, right? If you go back through history, South Africans have strengths in their strength, right, in power. And rather than hide from that, he just said, this is what we do, and we're all in on the approach. So from a 6-2 split perspective, from a game style perspective, we're just going to go all in strategically. And the interesting thing is teams knew that, but were not able to counteract, that approach. So a lot can be said there about rugby DNA. What's interesting now is there are some really exciting players that were sitting on the South African bench. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how they develop. I mean, you've got guys like RJ Snyman, obviously a pure ball runner and ball player. You've got guys like what's his name? Replacement halfback Herschel.
Herschel Yankees.
Yankees, yes. Incredible player. So you've got that real X factor there on the bench. You've got that real X factor there in South African rugby. It'll be interesting to see how they utilize those skills now going forward. They've proven a model that works for South Africa. Are they going to continue on that with a forward-dominated approach, or will they look to evolve their game? I'm not sure. It'll really depend on the coach that's coming in. What are your thoughts on that in particular in terms of game style?
See, unfortunately, this is the thing. I mean, for many years, and probably one of the biggest things that was fought against Rassie for a while, and that has quieted up. But a large discussions from South Africa is obviously that we should be following the New Zealand model of trying to move the ball more Super Rugby style, because that's interesting. A lot of our Super Rugby teams, like the Lions, the Sharks, and to some effect the Stormers, the Bulls, not as much, have really started to move the ball a lot and really start playing open play and avoid the forward contact that the Springboks obviously been for many years known by. And I've been the Bulls are a proponent of effectively, and I'm a big Bulls supporter, you can see the flag right here, but effectively they've always been a case of like play that style, play and continue the DNA. And yes, I think it works. I'm a fan of it. Unfortunately, it hurts where South Africa it doesn't earn us any fans, and that's where I think the problem is, that it earns us fans when we're winning, but as soon as we lose, it's the first thing that gets thrown out the window, and that's what hurts us. I think in the last the last 8 years, I think we do need to understand that there are places for everything. If the South African rugby can become very exciting and very X Factor style once the dominance is shown, and that's the last 30 minutes of a game. That South Africa does tend to start playing like that. So I think it should be. And that's why I'm happy that Rossi is staying to become a big proponent of the management and the growth. And I think why he's moving into director of rugby style, because I actually was at a dinner the other day where he was talking privately, and effectively the idea being that why he's moving is to start coaching South African Super Rugby and school coaches into that, to just follow the style, and not a boring style, but rather the DNA of the fact that you have this foundation to build off, and then build on your X Factor play. But you cannot just develop this X Factor play out of nowhere. We do not have the players for it like New Zealand or Australia do. We need to foundation it and then move from there.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, what the World Cup highlighted for me is that a lot of teams lack a plan B, or more specifically, they just seem to stick to their one style, win, lose, or draw. And I really think as rugby evolves over the next 4 years, it'll be the team that's able to use multiple strings to multiple bows that will be successful. So South Africa, for example, they've proven their ability to stick to a very, very dominant game style, as have England, as have New Zealand in their own respects. But the team, for me, New Zealand had patience against the English, and South Africa have a real opportunity to utilize some of their exciting young players there in the rugby setup. So to me, I really believe teams that will develop that additional approach of play will be very successful in the next World Cup cycles. Whether or not they can do it remains to be seen. But that's where I think rugby is heading.
Exactly. I think exactly that plan B. And I mean, this World Cup for me has been the World Cup of the finishes. This is the World Cup where I think the whole idea of the finishes has become a important factor, and showcasing how important it is no longer your bench. It's your effectively second team coming in to finish a game, and they have a different set of purposes and a different game plan South Africa utilized very well. And I think you're right that's the next evolve of the game, is that how can they have that plan B in that finishes game. But one last comment before we finish, because it has been getting long. I should ask, what do you feel the actual commentaries from like players like people's like Gusco saying that they should actually reduce the number of subs that rugby brings into it, saying that they should bring it down to 3, as South Africa abused that ability to have that 8-man bench. Do you feel that is correct? Do you feel it affected the game at all? Or is 8-man the correct amount? I mean, it has been increasing steadily. Is he correct?
Abused is a strong word. Look, we're all playing by the same rules. Having an 8-man bench gives an opportunity for teams to develop, as you say, right, starter and finisher roles. I've got no issue with it. I actually think it opens up a lot more discussion strategically that I'm really enjoying. How teams will start a game, how teams will play strategically, what assets they have at their disposal on the bench. I like an 8-man bench because for exactly that reason. It just gives teams an opportunity to carry a few more options off the bench, to consider how they want to finish, to change game plan. I find it fascinating. So I'm a fan of that approach. Whoever said that, sorry, I missed who you mentioned those comments came from, but I think that person's got rocks in the head. I think we're all playing by the same rules. So to point out any single team for being smart around how they utilize those resources is just ridiculous to me.
No, yeah, it's a French center from it's English center actually, Jeremy Gusco from a while ago, who he commented now after the World Cup players like on a couple of South African media endpoints also, just saying that we kind of abused it and somehow cheated by it. But I was like, that's not really fair, because we all had 8 team players. It's not really like that was the rule. There was no rule that you couldn't have 6 forwards. So that's fair. I mean, some people were stupid when South Africa started that way. So now don't change your mind afterwards. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I mean, I think that's why I enjoy it, because it's not only about it's also obviously about player welfare. That's the biggest idea. You got to take into account player welfare. That's why you cannot have these games are brutal, and they are getting more and more brutal every day. I blame Fiji slightly for that, because they are one mean fun team to play against. But that's, I think, that's the beauty of it. But you're right. This is the game of rugby is not a brute. Like everybody might say it's this brute game, but there's so many tactical positions, and that whole extra man in the bench and the 8-man bench is another really wealth of moments which can change a game. And that's why it's not a game where you can watch the first half and say that's the result. Many times rugby is decided in that last 30 minutes, and that's what that bench is so important for.
Yep. No, I like it. I think it's exciting for rugby. Yeah, I think more teams will be a lot more conscious around how they use their bench and how they set up for the finisher role. And it's one of these things, right? So the team that, seems to find and evolve the game first is normally the team that cops the criticism. But there's an old adage, winners can speak and losers should listen. So it's as simple as that for me. That's it.
That's poetic. That's poetic. I love it. So let me close off here by asking you one last thing. I want to kind of get your idea of these 8 teams we discussed tonight. Before we close off, who do you feel is going to be the biggest winner in the next World Cup? The team that's going to grow, not win, but maybe just grow the most and really kind of like shock us in the next World Cup. And who do you feel is the biggest loser going into the next World Cup?
Oh, good question. So biggest winner is France for me. They've just got so much upside there from commercial resources, motivation of a home World Cup. I expect their rugby unions to get right in behind them if they can control the franchises, which I know the franchises there have a lot of say around French rugby. But if they can get control over that side of things, and if they can get a coaching staff in place, which it looks like they're building, who can take them forward, to me, they will be the biggest winners in the next World Cup cycle. The biggest losers, I think it's a really difficult road for Irish rugby. How they move forward from here is going to be very, very interesting. But given the loss of Joe Schmidt, given the fact they have a number of aging players there as well, I'd like to see them promote some of the younger guys and start giving them opportunities early in the World Cup cycle so that they are developing that player pool. But that might come at the expense of results over the next couple of years. But I really think if they, they're in a very critical position now in their development, they have to focus on ensuring that they have, some additional firepower at their disposal. If they can do that, then they can be competitive. But I actually think the job for them is very, very difficult in the next 4 years.
I agree with you on those 2 choices. I think that's perfect. But yeah, let's close off and say I just want to say thank you so much, man, for an amazing chat on the next 4 years of rugby. I wish you all the best in your channel. Before we close off, though, I just want to share, let people know where they can find you. What's your handle, all those good things, and your closing messages.
Yep. YouTube, Hakatime Rugby. That's where you can find me. And I'm working out what I'm doing with the channel, but certainly I'll be covering a lot of European discussions, a lot of Southern Hemisphere discussions. 6 Nations is coming up. I'm really excited for the Lions Tour as well, so I think I'm going to do a long-running series there. But Hakatime Rugby in YouTube is where you can find me. I really appreciate the time, man. It's been an enjoyable chat. Hope we can do more of this in the future. And thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. But thanks, guys. Thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate your time. Follow me. I've got another series coming up, talking to some of the Bulls coaches and players going up this next week, and trying to pull in some past players for the Super Rugby season, discussing it. And yes, it's going to be an exciting 2020. Join me on that and follow me on. Thank you so much, man, for joining us. And yeah, cheers, guys. Enjoy and have a great week. Be good to each other. Cheers.
Thanks, man.